Why can someone in Russia face a 20-year prison sentence for Stalker 2? How did a game that gained a massive fan base in Russia and became a cult classic among gamers end up banned by the Russian government? Why has a game about events from so many years ago become a tool that the Russian government now uses to assert its influence on the global stage? Stalker is not just a game, it is a phenomenon. The following fans all over the world are still rewatching their world through their screens, and with each new release, they expect more action, more mystery, and more stalkers. It all started in 2007 when the world met Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl. The game worked like a bomb, not only in Russia, but also in the CIS countries. It became a real cultural symbol. And then, on the eve of the release of Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl in 2022, everything suddenly went wrong. The expected release was under attack, and the Russian authorities decided to, well, let's say, put the emergency brake on. Why did this happen? Today we will figure out what exactly led to the game winning the hearts of players and why its ban became such a loud event. Stalker 2 is a sequel to one of the most popular and unique games in the post-Soviet space. It was developed by none other than GSC Game World, a Kiev studio that in 1995 decided to immerse players in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, so much so that its atmospheric world is still etched in our memories. The first part of the game, Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl, was released in 2007 and became a real breakthrough, incorporating everything: survival, science fiction, and mysticism. Some called it a masterpiece, while others simply could not fall asleep after nighttime adventures in the zone. The second part of the game, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl, promised even more details, a larger world, even more fears and excitement. But here's the problem: politics. Fans' expectations began to crumble even before the release. Why? Because the political situation between Ukraine and Russia turned out to be much more influential than the entire atmosphere of Chernobyl taken together. And this became the main reason why the much anticipated game never appeared on the Russian market. Since the release of the first part of Stalker, the game has become a real cult phenomenon in Russia. And no wonder. Chernobyl is not only a tragic page of history, but also a real symbol that constantly fueled interest. The game recreated an exact replica of the exclusion zone, and many players felt that it was not just fictional. It was like a real invasion of reality, where every step could be the last. What can you say? The game was really dangerous, like the zone itself. And of course, the atmosphere of the game was impossible not to notice. Survival, combat, science fiction, and a bit of mysticism, all this was in the package of Stalker, and each fan got his own ghost in the form of a familiar gaming experience. The game became not only a commercial hit, but also a real cultural phenomenon that could not be ignored. But here's what's interesting. Stalker has become so popular in Russia that its fans have gone further and started creating an entire universe around the game. For example, they've written more than 300 books. Yes, you heard right. So many people, so many fantasies. Some could have become bestsellers if they hadn't competed with real books about the zombie apocalypse. And that's not all. There are more than 20,000 mods, role-playing games based on the Stalker universe, TV series, and films. However, when one Russian fan said that we are creating a new cultural code, others probably thought perhaps it would be better to immediately shoot a TV series about stalkers. Otherwise, people will get tired of the books. As for Gary's mod, the creators on this platform are simply on fire. They shoot a bunch of videos and not just shoot, but continue to make sequels. Thus, one episode of the video turns into a whole movie saga. And how can you not admire such hard work of fans? This is not just a hobby, it is a sacred mission to continue Stalker and not let it fade away. In general, if Stalker is not just a game, but practically a lifestyle, then Russia has definitely become its home. They definitely know how to build worlds here. The ban of Stalker 2 in Russia was directly related to the political situation, especially the outbreak of war in Ukraine in 2022. GSC Game World remained a Ukrainian studio, and many began to perceive it as part of the Ukrainian cultural identity. The ban of the game became an integral part of the Russian authorities' broader policy of blocking content associated with Ukraine. The main reasons for the ban: Number 1, political symbolism. The game, like other cultural products created in Ukraine, could have contained elements that were perceived as support for the Ukrainian people in the context of the war. The game world could have been perceived as a reflection of national interests that were incompatible with Russia's position. The game could have been interpreted as part of an information war, even if this was not stated directly. Number 2, connection with Ukraine. The very fact that the game was being developed by a studio from Ukraine already put it at odds with Russian state policy. In the conditions of military tension, Russian authorities were inclined to view any cultural products from Ukraine as potentially hostile. This factor was one of the reasons why Stalker 2 was banned, even though the game itself had no obvious political messages. Number 3. Interpretation of the events in Chernobyl. Games often contain elements that can be interpreted as hidden political symbolism. In the conditions of war, the symbolism of Chernobyl, which is an important part of Ukrainian history, was also perceived as potentially uncontrollable and dangerous. Therefore, the authorities could perceive such a game as a threat to internal security, considering it part of cultural aggression. Number 4, Russophobia and extremism. Russophobia, this is a Russian term meaning dislike or hatred towards everything Russian. The Russian authorities were also concerned that the game might contain elements that would be perceived as Russophobia, a call to extremism, or even justification of terrorism. In the conditions of international isolation in which Russia found itself, any hints of violence or incitement of ethnic hatred were perceived as threats to domestic stability. The ban on the game could have been due to the fact that its elements could be interpreted as a violation of the law on combating extremism and nationalism. Even if there were no such overt elements in the game, suspicions in this direction could have had a decisive influence on the authorities' decision. Number 5, financing the war. That the money from the game's sales could go to support the Ukrainian army, which was another reason for the ban. The authorities claimed that Russian players, by purchasing the game, would be essentially financing Ukraine's hostile actions, which violated Russia's national interests. This was an important part of the decision, since economic support for Ukraine in a war situation was perceived as a threat, and the Russian government decided to limit this flow of funds to prevent indirect support for the enemy army. Thus, the ban on Stalker 2 became part of a broader Russian policy to limit the influence of Ukrainian culture and block any financial flows that could be used against the Russian side in the context of military actions. After the ban of Stalker 2 in Russia, the public reaction was quite interesting. On the one hand, fans literally started crying into their pillows because they have been waiting for the continuation of this cult game for several years now. For them, Stalker is not just entertainment, it is a whole universe in which they worry about every character and every event. Well then, bam, and a ban. Of course, such news could not help but cause a storm of disappointment. But what do real gamers do when they encounter blocking and banning? That's right, they start looking for ways to bypass the system. Russian fans of Stalker 2 couldn't just leave their dream under the unavailable heading. VPN, proxy servers, alternative platforms, all this became a real salvation. Gamers began to actively look for third-party ways to buy and install the game, bypassing the blocking. In general, the ban became for many like a red rag to a bull. If one path didn't work, they found another. And if the Russian authorities hoped that the ban would become an insurmountable obstacle, then Stalker fans turned out to be more creative than one could expect. Another interesting opinion was expressed by State Duma Deputy Alexander Gorelkin, who commented on the situation with the ban on the game. He stated that a game like Stalker 2, with its mystical and vague plots that can be interpreted as hidden support for Ukraine, is absolutely unnecessary for Russian citizens. He emphasized that in the conditions of the information war, cultural products, even if they do not contain obvious political aggression, can influence public opinion and turn people against Russia. Gorelkin not only supported the ban, but also proposed to strengthen the fight against such games that can be used for negative propaganda. He also warned that gamers face prison for up to 20 years for purchasing the game from third-party sources. Thus, the reaction of Russian society was, to put it mildly, ambiguous. On the one hand, some citizens supported the actions of the authorities, believing that this is how the country protects its cultural identity. On the other hand, gamers began to master the gray areas of the internet, actively bypassing blockages and continuing to enjoy the long-awaited Stalker 2. After all, as they say, games are not only a way to escape from reality, but also sometimes a chance to frolic a little on its borders. The ban on Stalker 2 is a shining example of how the political situation can have a huge impact on the video game industry. In times of conflict, cultural products, even video games, become not only a source of entertainment, but also part of an ideological struggle. For Ukraine, it was a chance to assert its cultural identity in times of war. For Russia, it was an attempt to limit its influence and build its cultural border. And for the players, it was a tragedy, because Stalker is not just a game, it is a whole universe in which many see a reflection of their own reality and history. Nevertheless, despite the ban, Stalker 2 will continue to live on the international stage and attract the attention of fans around the world. But this case became a reminder that video games are not only a way to have fun, but also an important part of the cultural and political sphere. Well, we wish good luck to Russian gamers. I hope that the ban will be lifted and they will be able to enjoy the game. Believe me, they deserve it. Lead Rain was with you. Goodbye, everyone.